What is Four.ai?
So Four.ai is a service that listens and interrogates to recorded customer conversations, which a lot of companies, record for, quality and training purposes, as they say, or sales coaching and those kinds of things. Those conversations are happening really frequently, dozens of times a day. People are speaking to their customers or their prospects. And that the data in those calls, that information about what customers are interested in, the pain that they have, the impact they're trying to have, is not commonly documented really very effectively. So Four.ai is designed to take those conversations as transcripts and pass them through our AI to extract what we call insights. And those insights we then transmit out into the rest of the company, to the product team, to the marketing team. And those teams can evaluate and look at those to work out where they could be selling more, where they could be improving their product, where they could be improving their marketing messaging, just by listening to that voice of the customer.
So who sets the logic for the parameters of the search? So for example, say it was doing it for our company and say we are actually really interested on the negative feedback. Mm-hmm. Does a user have the ability to customize that logic?
Yes, they do. What we would do to answer the question that you had with the product is we might look at something like leads that did not convert or something like that, or customers that we lost. So someone who is having a sort of negative experience, maybe because they churned or because they were not the right kind of lead for your company in the first place. Maybe their leads were not what you could deliver. And we would look at those. So we're not looking necessarily for literally negative statements. We're looking for a negative situation that the customer wants to avoid, because the customer, certainly for churned customers, where they're moving to an alternative service, maybe they've been working with you for a couple of years, they can actually be quite attached to a service, and so they might only have positive things to say. So why do you churn? Well, we really love the product, but we're just looking at... So actually they may not describe it in a very negative way. So we're looking for what are those common phrases, sentiments, elements that customers are talking about that churned, even if it wasn't described negatively.
Okay, and once you've looked at the information that's been captured on the call, what do you do with it?
So the calls are turned into what we call these little insight statements. They are written in a particular way, such as using different methodologies like jobs to be done. So no, I want to so that kind of statements, which the engine can group together into certain topics. And so what you find is there are topics on different subjects to do with product functionality or the buying process or something like that, or upgrade process or deploying the technology. And we group those together into what we call topics. And the topics, the insights themselves are related back to CRM data. So each insight is attached to the contact in your CRM that set it, the account, the opportunity, the lead. And so what you can then do is say, well, this topic, this grouping of similar statements, I can look at it the other way around and say, well, who was talking about that? What accounts are talking about that? Are they my top accounts? What opportunities did they churn and so on? Did they convert or not? What was the value of those opportunities? And so I can start to get a sense of these kinds of things are being talked about by these kinds of people, and I'm interested in those people. So what I might do as a product leader is look at topics of, let's say, leads that did not convert or late stage opportunities that did not convert. I say, well, I want to do research. I want to research those and find out why they didn't convert. But I might be looking at thousands of insights from about 100 hours of conversation. And you guys have worked in sales and things like that. You can have a lot of conversation very fast. A team of people can do 100 hours of sales conversation very rapidly. And Four.ai will turn up 100 hours of conversation into maybe 2,500 insights. And no one can read 2,500 insight statements. So Four.ai pulls out, grouping them into topics, and secondly, to pull out the key insights within those topics. So as a product leader, I can dip in and out very fast and look for particular customers articulating things in a particular way by listening to itself back to the conversation. So I get all the context, which means that I can jump in and out of these insights, in and out of these topics. But because I can hear exactly, unfiltered, how the customer described or the prospect described the problem they were having, if I want to change my product, I can be extremely confident that I'm not hearing anything second or third or fourth hand, which can also happen in these kind of situations where sales tell you, I need this to close the deal, or we're losing deals because of this. And someone in product, that's that's too vague. Am I going to hang my hat on that? If I deliver that, is that going to materially change the sales? And I don't know. But with 4.4, you can sort of do your own research and listen to exactly what the customer said.
So because your product is working with a CRM, does your product look at the conversation as a standalone piece of data, or does it correspond that particular conversation with the information held about the particular client in the CRM? So in other words, where they might be along the process of onboarding or turning away the product.
So yes, we attach that conversation we know the participants on the call. So we know the internal participants, we know their roles. So that's usually as part of the CRM data. Oh, that's a salesperson, or that's a customer success person. So we gauge what that call is likely to be about simply by the people that are on the call. And we know, hopefully, you've put the contacts in your CRM because you're, a kind of sales team that keeps your CRM up to date. Before you phone people, your leads and your contacts are in there. So again, because we know who's on the call, we look at that. And so from that, we know the contact, and from the contact, we know the account, and from that, we know the opportunity or the lead or something like that. So every insight is tied back to that information, which is absolutely crucial if you're going to be able to, further down the line, say, well, this would be the value of making this change to our, I don't know, could be our pricing model or our marketing or something like that, because I can go back and see these were the accounts that were talking about this. So the CRM data is absolutely crucial. Let's say the CRM data doesn't have to be, no CRM is, I don't know about the data quality in CRMs that you've worked with, but it's never 100%. It doesn't have to be 100%. But basically accounts and contacts and things like that need to be there. And and then the only other thing we need is the source of the transcripts. And many companies, particularly in the mid-market, where we're kind of operating companies of about 100 to 150 people, have commonly bought these kinds of tools already, but for a different purpose, for note-taking individual conversations, so that they can send a replay of that back to the contact after they've spoken to them. After the meeting, this is what we discussed. That's just good sales technique. Or for sales coaching. So we're going to, a sales manager will review some conversations, and maybe they'll do that coaching with the individual and say, well, how could you have handled this differently, or something like that. Or they'll use it as an example to other people of, that was a great sales call. You guys are going to listen to the call, and you're going to feedback on it. But that's a per conversation, per call kind of a process. After that, a week later, that conversation will just sit in the archive forever. No one will ever do anything with it ever again, because the sales team is kind of using it in the moment, getting the value out of it, but the archive is unused. What 4.4 is doing is we're going back over the archive, which for some companies can go back several years. And as a company is moving, especially in the mid-market, in the growth phase, from a startup, we're building this product to sell to these companies, and now we've got 50, 100 customers, and we want to grow. Actually going back and listening to what those customers were talking about as you were acquiring them is going to tell you where we should be taking our product. Because if we take our product in this particular direction, we know our customers were talking about it, and we know which ones. So our sales team, after we've built that piece of our product, can go back and phone everybody on this list. Deliver white spacing activity, phone up and say, oh, hey, this thing you were speaking about before, we have a solution to that now. But no salesperson is going to have made notes about that at the time, because it was not relevant at the time to closing that opportunity that you closed.
Because this is a part, right? The penny dropped for me outside before we came in here. You say a sales team will use that data, but really it seems to me that it's a combination of product team and sales team. They're working hand in hand. And if I've understood 4.4 correctly, what it does really well is it uses honest data, aka the conversations with the customer, which is where the most honest data comes from. And then it helps the product team and the sales team to both understand that data and both make moves off that data.
You're absolutely right. And we talk about it being a common language, that a sales team thinks about the world in a particular way, and they have a particular language, acronyms and SQLs and MQLs and leads and opportunities and things like that. And that is an alien language. Product have a completely different language. They talk about sprints and epics and things like that, features and
that's
things.
An alien language as well.
And that's an alien language to sales. So they're not speaking the same language. So to communicate between these two teams, which work at a different kind of cadence, they have a different kind of background, they have different kind of personalities in these two teams. For those two teams to communicate effectively with each other about what the customer wants is usually quite difficult. Particularly if sales hear it and then try and communicate it to product. and then product tell them what they've built, and then they try and communicate it to sales. And 4.4 can sort of democratize that language. They can both look at what the customer said and say, this is how we're going to talk about this particular thing. This is the topic. This is the way, the grouping of how our customers are talking about this. So have a more common language. So when products say, sales might hear that the customer wants their product to integrate with something else. And product might build APIs. And salespeople don't know what APIs are. They don't know how to sell it. The customer doesn't really understand what APIs are. But they understand the problem the customer wanted to solve. And product understand that they've solved it, but they're talking about it in two different incompatible ways. And that can be very frustrating for both groups. Not to mention marketing, who actually have to sort of put this message one way out into the world, say, oh, we've built APIs, and the customer is saying, I don't know what that is. The customer phones sales team and says, oh, yeah, so tell me about your APIs. Whereas sales teams want to be talking about the value that they're bringing, the solutions, that what the customer will be able to solve, and product aren't necessarily talking in that language.
But what about from product to sales? So insights from the product team, because you said product teams speak in their own language, and they do, and they see value in the products they're building, which aren't always mirrored by the sales team who are selling it to the client. They don't spot necessarily values, that are being provided by the product team.
And it's not that there's not value, it's just the way that they are communicating it back to the sales team first needs to resonate with them, because if you're selling something, you've got to get to a particular level of understanding, and then so that you can then put that into your customer situation so that your customer understands. And if you're just parroting what the product team have told you, then that is going to come over to the customer as, I don't know, lacking, it's not
understanding, really.
Lacking understanding, yeah. So it's just not gonna land as effectively as it could with the salespeople just repeating.
I mean, time and time again, I've been on a phone call with a large organization, and they say to you at the end of the phone call, your call's, or the beginning, your call's being recorded, and if you'd like to leave your thoughts and feedback as to how we were today, you hang on at the end of the call, and you can leave it for 2 minutes. And you think, I would rather, not thanks, because I don't think it's going to be listened to. I don't think it's going to be acted upon. And as a organization, if as a brand you can build a culture where you're seen to be listening to the customers' pain points and then adapting as quickly as possible, that's great. And your product shortens that. Who is the typical type of client who's going to benefit most from something like 4.4?
I'd say that the kind of ideal customer and is actually one that's moved from the startup phase into the growth phase. And it's been my experience that when at the startup phase, when there are maybe 10 people in your company, everybody's doing everything. Everybody's a salesperson. Everybody works on the product. Everybody discusses the marketing messaging. And you sit in a room together, or maybe you did pre-COVID, you all sat in the room together and you're listening, constantly hearing. Someone gets off a sales call and says, oh, X, Y, Z. And that works great as a startup. When you scale up, get into the growth phase, and you're given a bunch of private equity money to scale your company, the divisions in the company start to be created. And this is just inevitable. This is natural. No one did anything wrong by this happening. But now you have a product team and a sales team and a marketing team. And the people who were in the startup phase hire those people. So those people move up the executive level and they talk to each other. But the newly built product team, newly built sales team, newly built marketing team do not speak to each other directly. They can communicate via the executive, but what it means is that sales are still having the direct conversations with the customer, but everything's being relayed now. The product team aren't in the room hearing what the customer is saying or what the salespeople are saying. And these departments drift apart. And it's no one's fault, and this is just inevitable. But my view is that that activity in the room, when that was just 10 of you, this is what 4.4 brings to those teams. It makes them still directly connected to the customer, even though they're in different teams. All these people that you've just hired are also new. Maybe that you've tried to get them from industry, but they don't know anything about you, your product, your customers, the journey you have been on, how your customers use your product. You have to upskill them really, really fast, and it's very, very hard to do. And again, 4.4 gives you a way of being able to interrogate the data to say, well, I'm a new BDR, and I've had my general training, and I know I'm about to get on a call with this lead, and I know that this lead has, maybe they filled in a form on a website, a couple of, they've written a paragraph saying this is what I'm looking for. And I know they work in this kind of industry, and I know this kind of size of customer, and I'm going to have to talk to them with my training. But what I could do with 4.4 is I could find, which 4.4 has the capability, I'm going to go and listen to some other conversations from experienced BDRs, and I'm going to search for to find instances of where the customer was talking about these things and find accounts where we have solved that problem. So when I get on that call, I'm now speaking from a position of experience saying, oh, yeah, we have that solution. We solved it for this customer in this way. And that's how you're going to get that lead to convert. That's how you're going to have a great first call. So we are much more rapidly upskilling that layer of the company that got brought in as part of the growth journey in all of these departments, because they can listen to the voice of the customer in a way that they otherwise don't have access to.
Where does that inexperienced BDR's journey into the insight end? In other words, do they eventually, does 4.4 bring them all the way down to that original phone call? Are they listening to the voice of their colleague, or are they reading insights captured by 4.4?
They are, ultimately, they can listen to the actual conversation, and even that very part of the conversation where that insight was expressed. And they're also doing this right through the CRM. So we have a Salesforce app sits right inside Salesforce. So when I'm looking at my lead in Salesforce, I'm going to be calling. I should be doing some research. I'm going on LinkedIn. I'm looking up, information about this company and so on. Maybe on the company's website. But right inside the CRM, it's showing you other leads that are similar to this lead, just based on the CRM information. Same size company, same industry, same region. And here are insights, predicted insights, as in we're trying to predict what is about to happen on this call you're actually having from other conversations that have been had. And you can inspect those and look at those and say, that's interesting. These are the different topics that I might choose to talk about or the customer might ask me about. And I can dip in and out of that. I can dip into a topic and I can read some insights. But one might particularly catch my eye and say, oh, well, actually, because I looked at their website, I know that they have likely have problem X. So I'm actually going to listen to that snippet of the conversation. So you don't have to listen to lots of conversations. You can explore the data as makes sense to you. But because this is right inside the CRM, it's right at your fingertips. It's right there. So you can click in and out, and this whole activity shouldn't take you more than 5 or 10 minutes. And then, because what you're trying to do with that lead is you're trying to get the next conversation. You're not trying to close the deal. You're trying to have the next conversation. You're trying to come across as knowledgeable and experienced in the problems that your customer has so that you can move on to the next conversation. The risk is marketing has spent all of its time and effort getting these marketing qualified leads. And in these mid-market companies, especially ones selling complex products with solution sells, those leads are hard to come by, actually. They're difficult and expensive to create. So if a lead does come in and they did have the need, but the BDR couldn't actually, really sort of sell that element to that customer, that customer might go to a competitor who did have full force technology, who did have a good conversation, coming away with the impression that, yes, that company is a company that I want to carry on this conversation with. So it's all the more reason. But the people having those conversations at the growth stage are those new people in the company. It's not the experienced salespeople or the CEO, who's having the conversation at the startup phase with all the knowledge and experience. They're doing that kind of founder-led selling or director-led selling. You've handed over this valuable resource to quite an experienced but enthusiastic group who want to do a good job. But there's a lot of risk that you've actually not necessarily empowered them to have the best conversation they can have.
Yeah.
And with 4.4, you're giving them the tools. You're not saying you have to attend this training or do this. You can directly yourself do your own research and listen to read these other insights and inspect these other things.
It actually seems to me that what you enable the kind of founding team to do is not just give the SDR tools, but actually to give them, in a weird way, their own experience.
Yes.
Because their experience, their product knowledge, and their kind of path has been decided by the conversations they've been having with customers up to that point. And the best thing you could possibly do to a new member of the team is bring them up to speed with all the conversations you've had so far. Because, like we spoke about before, conversation is more honest, typically, than email. But I want to touch on that point because email is less honest, perhaps, more formal, harder to interpret than a conversation. But do you use email and the other communication methods alongside the transcripts of the conversations to help build a picture of the lead?
No, we just use conversations. And that's definitely our focus. And I really think that conversations are so much of an untapped resource. And we know there's a lot of information in the metadata of a conversation. A conversation is set up and has purpose, and there's people on the call with a particular purpose, but emails are sent for all kinds of different reasons. So to try and mine that information out of emails.
Right.
And I kind of feel like the emails form part of the searchable documentation that maybe exists. They can be forwarded and indexed and so on. But the unstructured nature of the conversation data, and the fact that what's really exciting about a lot of that conversation data is it's captured from people your company didn't engage with. Again, going back to those leads and those BDRs, they might have had one conversation. No one wrote anything down. No one emailed it. I mean, the BDR will, make notes, but that person's never going to write you an email describing what they did and didn't like. So we talk a lot about the voice of the customer, but in a way, it's the voice of the prospect. It's kind of more exciting. It's where's our white space? What leads could we be going back to? Or how were people expressing why they decided not to go forward with us? And if you have a customer, they're much more likely to put things in email. Or there are support tickets that they've requested and so on. There's a lot more written down. There's much less written down at the other end of the journey.
Yeah.
But the largest volume of conversations is probably had at the lead stage.
With the prospects.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, not in a weird way, it drives innovation, really, because what happens is the product team get to discover what the market wants as quickly as possible. You don't even have to become a customer to find out why they left you in the first place. You can find out why they didn't choose you in the first place, and then translate that directly into product work, which is unusual. And this is what excites me about AI and its use cases for unstructured data. Because the structured data, you can see how it saves you man hours and things like that. It makes your job quicker. But when a tool like yours is tackling unstructured data, which in other words would never have been touched by anyone in the organization otherwise, it's very exciting. With regards to accuracy, whenever I've spoken into a MacBook or asked Siri to note down what I'm saying, it always gets about every fifth word wrong.
Yeah.
So what procedures, what do you have in place to ensure that your transcripts from the conversations are accurate?
There's actually quite an exciting element, which I did not anticipate being the case. And I'll give you an example of a transcript where there was a conversation between a company and the customer was Scottish, and the transcription was full of errors. The customer was describing their need for APIs, but it's being transcribed as ATI, like 80I, ATI. And that was the transcription. But when we took that transcription, just as it had been transcribed, full of errors and people talking over each other, and that's what a transcript looks like. It's very messy. And you push it through one of these really modern large language models, like the kind from OpenAI, is that they can turn it back into what it's supposed to say. So it turned it back into API, which was unexpected. So what's interesting about it is they can clean up a transcript and turn it back into, they can make it more accurate. You would have thought that you take a recording and you transcribe it and maybe push it through these different processes. It gets more and more lossy. You lose more and more fidelity as you go on. Like, if you compress a photograph and you send it to someone else and they email it to someone else and it gets compressed and compressed, it goes all sort of, blurry. That would be what happens with these models. But interestingly, that isn't what happens. That our technology, because it is looking for, there's a lot of context about the company. We give the model a lot of context about who the people are on the call, the purpose of the call, the business the customer is in. And it's able to take that information with the transcript and actually make the transcript more accurate.
Right.
So if you were searching those transcripts for APIs, you would never have found that Scottish customer because that wasn't being transcribed as API. But if you search our insights, you do find everything about APIs. So
your insights, your product is, first of all, correcting the transcript so that it's useful data to study, then studying it. So if a client's onboarding with 4.4, do they need to have the transcript of their recorded calls, or is the recorded call as a standalone piece enough?
Today, they need the transcript to be there. They need to be using a recording solution that has also transcribed the conversation as well. That's as we go forward, we're going to be implementing more different kinds of technologies that create those transcriptions. Companies who sign up with 4.4 today, it's about 4 or 5 clicks to sign up for 4.4, to integrate it with your CRM, to integrate it with one of our supporting recording solutions, such as from a company, for example, like Gong. And 4.4 takes it from there. There's no other configuration to do at all. And we've really worked hard on making it absolutely zero effort, because so many other of the technologies to gather the voice of the customer are enormous amounts of effort. They require you to make surveys, or require people to set up, post customer acquisition conversations with the customer, research interviews, and so on. They're very, very, time-consuming, hit and miss kind of things. Especially if you churn a customer, that customer is not necessarily really massively interested in talking to you about an exit interview. Those ones that you have are not going to be representative of your customer base at large. Let's say you've got 100 customers and unfortunately you churn some, you're going to be speaking to those. Is that really representative of your industry, despite the fact that that customer might have given you good feedback? Is that representative of all customers? You've got no way of knowing. We've got to assume not. But people use those, and they're very difficult and time-consuming to set up. And so we want 4.4 to be the other end of the scale. If you've been using one of these note-taking technologies for even a few months, even 3 months, and you have a CRM, which everybody does, 4.4 is going to be able to give you insights within 24 hours. So we go back over that conversation data, we suck it all in, create all these insights, we create the topic models, and 24 hours later when you sign into 4.4, there is actionable data and insights and topics in there that we think, we believe strongly, in fact our evidence has shown, that people are pretty blown away by it. They're like, this is interesting, I'm going to investigate this, I'm going to look into this, because this is interesting.
With great power comes great responsibility. And it sounds like an incredibly powerful tool you've made. I'm imagining myself as a startup in the growth phase. I've got a load of new BDRs. Do I necessarily want them to be able to analyze the insights captured by my entire organization?
We want to work with companies who want to enable that. One of the problems, I think, is you enter the growth phase, especially if you've had the 10 people, and let's say you've got some solutions consultants, that sort of technical people who sit between sales and products, who really understand the product in great depth. They've deployed those customers. They know everything about how the customers deploy it, and they haven't written anything down because you're a startup. And you get into the growth phase, and all that information is in their heads, and they're incredibly valuable people because of their knowledge and experience and their retained knowledge, which is all in their heads. And in the growth phase, you might want them to document everything that they know about the customers. What if they leave? What if they're poached by a competitor? And they're never going to do that, never going to write anything down because they're too busy, doing their actual jobs. But one of the key things that actually 4.4 helps you do is to extract that knowledge. Now, zero effort. Those people don't have to have written anything down, but they were the people on the calls discussing, talking about how the system is going to be deployed, what it's going to do, and those kinds of things, those implementation details that other people need. So by taking those insights and allowing anyone in the company to self-serve, to upskill themselves, is actually what a company wants to have happen, rather than what they don't want to have happen. So I take your point about data security and privacy and so on, but the kind of companies that get the most value out of 4.4 are the ones that want that information to be pushed out, to have that breadth across those different departments, and to allow those individuals to self-serve. The self-service element is one of the most powerful things. If I'm in customer success, I don't need to be, hopefully, I don't need to be, I'm picking up a new account that sales has just sold to today. The sales team needs to brief you on what they bought and why they bought it and all those other kinds of things. And they're probably in a hurry because they want to get back to selling. And the customer success person's got to get on a call with that person who just bought it. As far as that person's concerned, I've already told you that company I've just bought something from, and you want me to repeat all of it again, explain it all again to someone new? That's a poor experience. They want their customer success person to be able to self-serve, dig into the insights, listen to those snippets of conversation. They get on the phone with the customer, completely the opposite. They are really clued up about what their customers said, their needs, the impact they want to have. Customers blown away by how much information they had. So thanks for the question, because it's a good question. It allowed me to talk about that. Yeah. But actually, I think it's the other way around. I think that the inability to get stuff out of those early employees' heads to everybody else, that's the problem that people want to.
So is there a degree of education to your customers, because they're potentially sat on this gold mine of information that they've previously used in a completely different aspect, as really for training. Now it's let's dig into that treasure trove of information. So is there a real educational process for you to explain to your customers that this information is there?
I thought there would be more of that. And actually, if you look at our product and its user interface, it's quite simple, which is great. And an experienced sales manager or someone in sales operations or someone in marketing, again, maybe who was in that group of original 10 that I keep mentioning, when you sort of say, oh yeah, we're going to take all that data and we've consulted, they get it immediately. They say, oh, that's brilliant. Like, I really thought there would be had to be more proof in the pudding, maybe, to actually sort of show more of the outputs of the system. These are the kind of things you can get. But I think that people instinctively recognize, oh yeah, there would be something in there valuable. And even if, let's say, out of 100% of the, let's say, topics, insights, value you can get out of 4.4 system, the top third, let's say, of what we tell you about your customers, you already knew. Customers are telling you about, oh yeah, the product, the market, we already knew that. That's what we knew. The next third is maybe things that we suspected. We suspected customers were talking about this, but maybe we didn't know which customers in which kind of volume. And there's another third that we had no idea that people were talking about that. And even if it's not a third, even if it's 20% or 10%, I think people immediately recognize that I need to know that. Even if it's just 10% of everything that 4.4 can tell me is of actual usable interest, that is absolutely worth the money. So I think people make that leap, that they do not need 4.4 to tell them everything about everything. They're looking for the system to uncover what they either provide data, CRM data, to say, we suspected this, but now we understand the value of it much better, or the bit underneath that we didn't know was there at all, or those kinds of things. So I think that people do get it very quickly, which is very, because we haven't been launched for that long, that it's gratifying that people do get it very, very quickly, which is great.
Could you share a little bit about how you first got it? When you first saw that there was this opportunity for companies to innovate using data they already had?
Myself and my business partner, Rob, we've been working in, so my background is all product and technology, sort of the sort of CTO kind of stuff. But what I find really fascinating when I learned about sales, several years ago, it's not just people randomly phoning up and having a chat. It's extraordinarily process-driven and data-driven and metric-driven. You look at the funnel. You can work back. In order to drive this number of closed deals, we have this number of active opportunities. There must be this number of leads. This number of marketing leads need to come in the top of the funnel. There's an enormous amount of data and process, and I think there's actually even more data and process in a sales process than there is in a product or an engineering process. And I think engineering teams find this fascinating, or I do anyway. And so there are highly organized, and this is in the growth phase, B2B SaaS, in the growth phase, selling a solution sell. It's complicated, you've got to get organized. They're dealing with a lot of data, a lot of metrics, a lot of process, and a lot of methodologies. Sales methodologies like Spiced and Medic and spin selling and things like that. There are whole bookshelves written on how the best process by which you can take somebody from A to B in a sales process. And there are a lot of sales tools out there. Any given company might have a dozen different pieces of technology. You've got your CRM, your note-taking tools. Maybe you've got tools to, record little pieces of video and send those to your customers, or tools to manage different parts of the process, and tools to help you write emails, and all these different kinds of things. And a sales team is used to having a lot of different tools. Got LinkedIn Sales Navigator, got all these different kinds of things at my fingertips. And because I've worked a lot in sales technology, I knew the landscape was there, and I knew that people were recording these calls, and I knew what they were using them for. But because I'm from the technology background, I knew that the technology exists now, right now, in a way it didn't exist just maybe 2 years ago. These new large language models that can make sense out of this language in a way that didn't exist before. What 4.4 does for your company you could do without 4.4 if you wanted to have a team of people reading transcripts and listening to calls. It's just a scale problem. You can't scale it.
And a price.
And the price would be astronomical. Nobody does that. Well, in fact, one of the companies that we did some early work with, in fact, did do a project to try and find every customer that mentioned a particular topic. And that person was using a note-taking tool and was searching for transcripts and trying to pull that out. And it took them like a month to do that. And immediately the next question was, well, what about this? And that is very, very high latency, non-interactive. You can't do that. That person isn't going to go sit there for another month trying to answer the second question. But they engaged with us, and we put about 1,000 hours of their conversations into our engine. We were able to answer that question in a fraction of a second. We know who's talking about this. Wow. And we know which accounts, the value of those accounts, the value of those opportunities, and so on attached to that. But the value is then in the interactivity. Then it's, now I have a follow-on question. So that's why 4.4 doesn't really try and say, walk you all the way to the end of the meeting and say, this is the answer. Every answer is going to be different for every kind of customer. But if you ask a question of the data and 4.4 says, well, here's the answer, immediately you say, well, what about this? Or I wonder, what about this insight? Or that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to dig into that. It's a very exploratory way of...
Gives you that freedom to really roll with it, right?
It really does.
You don't have to think, is it really worth investing another month in trying to find out the answer to this question? So invariably, you just don't ask the question.
Yes, exactly. So people just don't do that. Yeah.
It seems to me that the trend was, a few years ago, that the new technologies of the time allowed company owners, smaller companies generally speaking, to actually cut out customer calls. They started to onboard people into their products by web forms. They would try and automate processes and give you this kind of brand feel by email and all the rest of it. And it doesn't really work out so well. And there are quite a lot of companies you can't book straight in to have an onboarding call with. And I suspect that's because those startups, high-growth startups, realized that the calls were quite large labor allocations for not that much in return if the lead didn't convert. Now you're turning all of those conversations into productive research. That's pretty cool.
I think you should get vastly more monetary value, obviously, than you spend on something like 4.4. But you've sort of already done the research. Product teams having interviews with customers. You've already effectively done that. You've just never used this in the way. So if you don't buy 4.4, then you're wasting an enormous amount of money because you spent loads of money, as you're saying, on having those calls, as if you had done those interviews, which would have cost you money. So you're sort of 4.4 is just unlocking that value that you have actually already to some extent acquired.
Great. Chris, thank you very much for your time today. It's been fabulous talking to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.